Coming up, Ben Simmons underwent a second surgery on his back, and it's supposed to lead to a full recovery. However, there is no world that we cannot discuss the ramifications this has on the Brooklyn Nets organization, on Ben Simmons' career, and the path forward. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, as we dive in on what is a conversation we've had many times before, and every new layer only seems to make you feel a little bit worse, both for the Brooklyn Nets organization and the individual. Ben Simmons underwent back surgery once again. It was successful by the reporting of it. We'll get into some of the specific quotes, but just on a very, very high level, this is a very, very bad sign.
Yeah, look, we already knew Ben Simmons was out for the season. That was clear. They were exploring, last we had heard, they were exploring options around, what dealing with this nerve impingement, which had been sort of the source of his issues to begin with, and sort of like the ongoing problem, although there was lots of different injury markers and designations that he got along the way. You have to feel like this was the core one, right, that he's been dealing with for going on years now. And, we'll talk about the ramifications. The nuts and bolts of it are, this is his second microdiscectomy in a 2-year span. He had another one in May of 2022. At the time, it was said that like full recovery, full return to play recovery was, within the year, but like full back to your normal self was like 18 months, right? Like that was the timeline that we had seen posited and thrown around many times. So he reached and cleared his 18-month on the first one. And now the Nets are saying that, it's successful and he'll be back ready for training camp. But I just don't know how you can take this with any sense of optimism really at all. You feel for the guy as like a human, right? Like this feels like we could be drifting toward the end here based on sort of like what we saw from him in terms of play and just like his inability to stay on the court. But overall, bummer news, though we can't really call it surprising, I don't think.
No, and there's a little bit more in the weeds on this, including thinking about, again, what would it look like even if he could come back? You mentioned there specifically about goes through the surgery, does come back the first time, but we saw what that looked like this past year, right? Ready to get back on the court. Well, that timeline shifted a little bit. He got out there, re-aggravated it, was away, came back for 4 games, and then was ultimately shut down for the remainder of the season. The question I think to start with here is, could this be, I know the words are ready to be back for training camp. It is not out of the realm of possibilities, and it is a lot further from 0% than I think Ben Simmons or the Nets or any just general basketball fan would want to acknowledge that Ben Simmons may not play basketball again. When you start talking about back surgeries, multiple back surgeries, he may sniff around training camp and trying to get back on the court. And I'm not putting anything on anybody about this in terms of responsibility, just reality. I don't know how you can set that expectation when playing at the highest possible level of athleticism. It requires more than just walking down the stairs in the morning. And I think that that's something that has rolled over here as he's tried to recover going back to the initial start of these injuries.
Yeah, speculating it is always hard because like we're not doctors and we're not like in the room and we're not performing surgeries and we're not training staff. So I think like, speculating on the exact like medical stuff, it would be, it'd be impossible. I'm just not, Doug Norrie, MD, even though I play one on television, right? Like, I think that it'd be crazy to do it. Now, on the other hand, one need only sort of look through the history here. And if you were just a betting man, of which we are, like just taking the information at which you have at your disposal and trying to decide what is like a good, reasonable bet to make around his future, you'd be crazy if you put it at higher than like 50% that he's going to I would put it at 0% that he returns to old Ben Simmons. I think like that's gone. Like, I don't think, or 1% or something sort of infinitesimal. After that, you have to scale it back so much. And I mean, in terms of like never playing again, it has to be non-zero, right? Like if you just look back at his timeline over the years of how many games he's played, 2021-22, 0 games, right?
Mhm.
2022-23, he played 42 games. This year, he played 15 total games, and now he's headed for another back surgery. And I know people will say, well, that 21-22 season, that wasn't all injury. It doesn't matter. It does actually at that point, it kind of doesn't matter. Frankly, it's almost worse that it wasn't all,
There's
that it might
something
not have
else
all
that
been
goes on
injury.
here that can cause missing games.
If you're making a prediction, adding another element that can have him not play doesn't help the prediction. It hurts it, right? Like it does, because you have to add in another factor. So what the percentage is, I mean, I would say 10% chance he never plays again. And that's way higher. That's way higher than I would put it for any other active player in the NBA that's 28 years old and was at one point an all NBA player, right? Like, I think it represents a very high number.
And and what's even crazier about this is you mentioned starting there in that season where he misses it for injury and also other reasons. But the 2 years prior, 2019-20 and the 2020-2021 seasons, like when you just go back, think about the fact that this is an all defensive first team player. This is an all NBA third team. This is an all-star. This is defensive player of the year, finishing 4th. The following season, listen, it's 12th, but he was in MVP considerations, finishes once again all defensive team as well, goes to the all-star and defensive player of the year, finishes second in that voting. Just in terms of the violent contrast between where Ben Simmons was at the end of his age 24 season to the next 3 seasons is the most dramatic drop off in expectation, in play, in perception, everything. And that is where, just like a totally human side of it, I feel absolutely awful for Ben Simmons because, and I'm sure some of these things on a personal level maybe was of his own doing, what went on in Philadelphia away from injuries. But my goodness, he was an ascending star. Like, he was among the faces of the NBA. And everything after that has been an absolute just tragedy from a pure injury standpoint, let alone piling on the other elements too, which is brutal. Like, and from a pure NBA fan standpoint, which you and I talk about a lot, I like the best players to be healthy and playing basketball. Now, is Ben Simmons any longer included in that discussion of best players? Of course he isn't. But the last time that we saw him playing full healthy basketball, he was. And you will not remember Ben Simmons as that player. You're going to remember what is now the 3rd and could go into a 4th season of real injury issues and concerns around what happens to him coming up. And that's why coming up next, we'll get into what it means for the Brooklyn Nets here, as this offseason was already massive. It now has a whole other layer to it and big decisions that they will need to make. Before we do, though, got to tell you that our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring some of the best fantasy pitch each and every week, all season long. Whether you're doing the daily drafts or you're counting the waiver wire, looking for that next big pickup, every week we got plenty of players to provide you that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So, Doug, who does Josh have picked out for eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy picks of the week?
Yeah, getting down to the nitty gritty here when it comes to the end of the fantasy season. A bunch of different guys you can probably take a look at this point. Kelly Olynyk for starters, starting at center in Toronto. If he's still available out there, just went for 19, 8, and 6 the other night, 31 minutes. You've got to figure out there's actually a decent amount of guys on Toronto. Grady Dick is out there starting because they've had Gary Trent out. They've had Bruce Brown might be available. He's been getting the start. RJ Barrett's been sitting out. So they've been kind of shuffling guys in and out over there in Toronto. So start with Kelly Olynyk and start looking at some of the other guys that are that are kind of in and out of the lineup. You can still look at Kyle Anderson. It's kind of been hit or miss there with Anderson, but with the Karl Anthony Towns out, he's going to stick in the starting lineup here. And just, slow-mo, it can be funny to watch sometimes, but he can definitely help you across the box score when it comes to fantasy. Kyle Lowry still grabbing the start over there in Philly for the 76ers as they deal with some of their own injury issues. So plenty of stuff to still grab over there on the waiver wire when it comes to fantasy basketball from Josh Lloyd. The Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time. Or, you'll love this, your money back. Plus, these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
All right, so as we continue, what is an unfortunate update around one Ben Simmons getting a second back surgery, although deemed to be successful and projected to be ready to go in training camp. So if you want to live on the optimistic side of it, although you'd have to say that you're taking a dose of delusion along with that, hey, this is going to help him be healthier and he's going to be able to get out there and play. And maybe we're going to get whatever version is still left of him. We're going to get that version of him coming up in the upcoming
But
season.
can I say one more thing about this before I want to get into the team side? But just to sort of round out, we had these exact. I mean, it feels like deja vu, or re-deja vu, whatever. Like the second time you do deja vu around, because we had these same conversations.
Deja vu part 2, as they say.
And I mean, even last year going into the summer, we really, I think more than most other people in sort of like Nets Nation, were really pumping the brakes on like, hey, just let's not get out over the skis here because this is serious and this history is kind of long. And I mean, we caught some real flack from people on this, that about even like just being sort of like not all the way gung ho about it, that like want him to be good, but being like, hey, you can't count on this. This is not to say like take a victory lap necessarily. It's to say we were pessimistic when there were others that were optimistic.
Right.
Now I think everyone is pessimistic. So it's like, I think there's
figure
like
out how to define where we are.
Yeah. I'm saying, I'm just saying that like, I think even last year there was people out there that would really, and I understand why, like you want to pin a lot of hopes here. He's a really good player, the great version of Ben Simmons. This team is totally different. I think we would totally agree on that. But last time where there was room for optimism, we were probably glass half full, even maybe a little less. Now, I think if you look across the landscape, you can't find anybody that would make a case for it, right? I think and maybe that's where the Phoenix rises from the ashes. Like, I don't know when it's literally everybody, but it's really hard to see that here.
Yeah. And listen, I'll still, however, not full the glass is, and it is closer to empty than it is having any liquid in it right now. I'll still, whatever I've left in that cup, I hope is the Phoenix from the ashes version of this. And sometimes I feel like we have to reiterate the fact we want Ben Simmons. There's multiple layers to this. Doug always says, better for the podcast. Team good, podcast good, more fun to talk about.
Well, sorry to interrupt you. I'll make this one very short. There is a group of people out there, and it's so gross, that victory lap this stuff as if like it's an indictment on his personality or his lack of wanting to play. I mean, people don't get back surgeries because they can't take like someone writing something mean about them. Like that's insanity. It's insanity. Real people with real followings say this kind of stuff, and it's disgusting.
Yep.
And so I'm agreeing with you there, and I'll cut that one short.
No, and that's the only it's the only reason why I bring it up is because you see the way other people are willing to discuss somebody who's going through physical pain and physical surgeries and is struggling with that side of things, being willing to say, you must be soft to not be willing to fight through these type of things. It's not real, or it shouldn't be real, even though some people choose to talk that way about it. That being the case, one other quick note as we talk about it from basketball side for the Brooklyn Nets going forward here. Ben Simmons is 27 years old. Yep. Like I mentioned that, the last great season when he was 24. Well, it's 3 years later. It's a handful of surgeries. It's a lot going on for him physically. You and I, one of the other maybe more lighthearted elements of this show has been when Doug Norrie has had to champion the fact that primes of careers do not start at 30. They are ending at 30. He's not saying they fall off a cliff, and I agree with him. I'm not saying they fall off a cliff, but the prime of a career is 27, 28, 29. And if you put it through that prism as well as you start to talk about from a team aspect, every year that there have been health issues for Ben Simmons, it actually it should, even if it wasn't back, even if it was just struggling to stay healthy and on the court for any number of reasons, it becomes more concerning because the quality of player that he's going to be, if he ever gets back healthy, starts to diminish now. The prime is dwindling away here for him in a way that for a player from a pure basketball standpoint already had some limitations to his game. We talked about this over this past season in a limited sample size. Well, he just doesn't seem to be as quick as he once was defensively. Does he fully trust his body? Maybe that's a part of it. But as he slows down a little bit, as he loses certain elements of his game, that's going to change exactly how you look at this player. Even if he comes back from this surgery and can give you 50 games next season, the version of this has to be now on a sliding scale in terms of what you get out of this player.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's some players you can look at and be like, hey, this will age nicely, right?
We used to say about Kevin Durant at the time.
Yeah, we talk about Durant with like this all the time. It's like, worst case scenario, he's 7 feet tall and has a wet jumper from anywhere on the court. And you know what I mean? Like, so maybe he's not peak Kevin Durant, but he's never going to be bad, right? Like guys that can age gracefully. Like there have been a lot of, mostly it's frankly, it's if you can shoot. Like if you like Ray Allen aged into a totally different version of his career late because he was like, okay, I'm not peak Ray Allen where I'm doing everything, but I can still literally make everything. So there's still going to be places for them. It's really hard to age out in the NBA when you can't shoot. Just for starters, like when your physicality and speed are the things that you've sort of like just been about your whole entire career, like just being physical, being fast, getting downhill. And we've seen that kind of disappear for him basically since he's been with the Nets, right? And there's been other parts of his game, like the vision is still there, right? And I think like he can get after it in defense at times. Like he has quick hands, he has decent instincts, although you can see those slowing down too with his like a lot of fouls in places where he just probably was getting steals in the past. And so he's just like not even the archetype that can age right into this. It's just because he's never solved other parts of his game that are massive holes. Like i.e. he can't shoot. He can't shoot. Like go find me a guy who's ages out into the NBA who can't shoot at all. And they don't exist. They don't exist. The guys who actually hang around are the guys that can still shoot. It's like, oh, PJ Tucker, he's still on a team here, right? Like, or they're just like, they can shoot enough. Like even like Kyle Lowry or something like that. It's like, okay, can do it enough. It's the guys that can't, there's no more place for him. And that's the other part with Simmons. Like we always knew his game wouldn't age gracefully. Right. And now we've gotten a glimpse of what happens when it ticks down 20% and it's not great. It's not great. And you tick it down another 5-10% and it's hard to imagine even it being on the court for a long stretch.
No, and you look at it too, it's, small sample size this year, around a 113 in terms of defensive rating. He was a 112 defensive rating a year ago, but you mentioned those key things, quickness, being able to be and stay in front of a player here. We already saw, and he never was in that same vein. We look at Nicholas Claxton, an elite rim protector around the basket. That wasn't a part of what we saw from Ben Simmons in and around his time with Brooklyn, obviously. And you mentioned, court vision can stay with you. But if you think that now and then the threat hasn't been there in Brooklyn either, the ability to be willing to tack downhill and get at the basket, that's the threat that opens things up. You can think of a lot of bad versions of players, not even Ben Simmons, just a lot of models of players that they don't see the court. Why? For reasons like this, right? For the holes in their game that make them unplayable. When you have this elite version of a guy in the back of your mind that you think you can get back to, you're always willing to hold on to it a little bit longer.
Sure.
But take the name off the back of the jersey, take the salary away from Ben Simmons here. We'd be telling a very different story over his time since he came over from Philadelphia to the Brooklyn Nets.
You'd be so confused. Like you'd be so confused if you watched him play and you think, wow, he just like never shoots, huh? That's kind of weird.
Right.
And he never goes to the basket. You'd be, if you had no
it's built into it now, into who he is. So you accept
it's part of the story, right?
Yeah.
Like humans are all about stories. We told ourselves the story. And so the story is what made it okay. But by any independent analysis, you would think, like, what on earth is going on here? The guy doesn't, like, he doesn't shoot. Like, it's so weird. So it was actually the past version of him in a lot of cases was what kept the leash longer when he came back because there was just such huge deficiencies in how he played. Again, I still think he helped the team for sure, but it was just glaringly obvious, but you only allowed it to keep going because you could still see this other version of him.
Coming up here in 1 second, the offseason ahead. How damning could this injury and the outlook for Ben Simmons negatively impact the choices that the Nets may very well be forced to make? We'll dive into those coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our good friends over at Stitch Fix. That instant confidence boost you get with an outfit that just makes you look really good. That's what I'm getting with Stitch Fix. I'm getting it right now, actually. What you're looking at, if you're staring in the camera over on YouTube, this is the Flag and Anthem hoodie because I went all in on hoodies from Stitch Fix, and it's been all in all the time with the stuff coming from Stitch Fix. It's a personal stylist. They're working with me on the stuff that I like, the stuff that's going to just fit right for me. It's going to look good. It's just going to make me feel good about what I'm wearing. It's super comfortable, really, really high quality as well. The professional stylist helps you find new on-trend favorites that work with the style that you already have and maybe upgrading it a little bit too. I definitely got some, if my wife is any litmus test here, definitely got an upgrade as well as like it's sticking in the same zone, but it's just better. And that's what I'm getting from Stitch Fix. It's just a way to level up your wardrobe. It's all so easy. It's just through the mail. They'll send you just the right pieces. You send back the ones that don't work for you. You keep the ones that do. Stitch Fix has you covered. It's style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon.
All right, so in talking about the update around one Ben Simmons, successful back surgery for the second time in 2 seasons. Yes, he is supposed to make a full recovery and be ready for training camp. However, you have to at least be speculatively concerned about what that's going to look like going forward. From a team standpoint, we've already talked about this. The offseason was going to be big, and we're actually coming just off an episode where we discussed Mikal Bridges and what his performances look like and how it's difficult to think about what spot this team is going to be in. Nicholas Claxton is up for his contract. And whether or not you think he's the perfect player or, what type of team you need to have in order to have him be a successful component of and what you want to pay him, it might become almost impossible for Brooklyn to want to bring him back now because you have no ability to move this $40 million of Ben Simmons. And if you bring in Nicholas Claxton back on the contract, we talked about this before, this already existed, but it just feels like it makes it a more difficult prospect. You're going to commit to having him and Ben Simmons and Day'Ron Sharpe, all a bunch of guys that, from what we can tell, cannot shoot the basketball on a roster, occupying space. Do you feel like this starts to change or influence how Sean Marks or whoever may be the GM, how they approach this offseason and maybe over the next 2 years as well? Because if your timeline was anything less than after the Ben Simmons contract runs out, how can you make choices? How can you make any choices when you still have him on the books with these injury concerns?
So Claxton aside, I've kind of long suspected, without, this is not sourced at all, it's just a feeling that I probably would have if it was me doing things, that I think the Nets had moved on from Simmons like a while ago, right? And like he's not part of any of their plans. Once they kind of saw it into the season, and they probably just kind of knew that it was cooked, right? And I think that my guess is that he's on the books for a salary, and that's it. I actually doubt, from a on-court standpoint, that they would make any decisions related to him at all.
Mm-hmm.
If I think I'm hearing you correctly, which is like, oh, he and Claxton. I don't now. That's separate than the money part, which
Right.
is, I think from a basketball standpoint, they're like, it's over. That'd be my guess. Like, how could you not be? It's $40 million. It's 1 year. Like, they're never resigning him. So
No.
right. So I think from that standpoint, they're probably not making any decisions.
And let's expand even beyond that. I brought up Nicholas Claxton. We want to pursue a superstar. Can you really commit to that type of decision? Like, why would you all say commit to that decision-making process this offseason if you feel like the following offseason is when you can make the multiple moves, you can make the bigger decisions and really reconstruct the team rather than saying, we'll bring back Claxton or we'll bring in the star. And then a year from now, that's when the wheels will start to turn because then you're right back there with Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson and the questions that are going to bubble up around them too.
I think that Nets fans need to prepare themselves a little bit here for like what it looks like now could be what it looks like next year.
What it looks
and
like.
I think that if you're, because for a couple different reasons. One, Simmons' $40 million is going to be on the books no matter what. They're not getting this off. I mean, without attaching significant assets to it or taking back like horrible money. Like money that you definitely wouldn't want, like Zach LaVine, $50 million 4 years from now, or
money that
like
lives, lives beyond the upcoming season as
right.
well.
Like these are the scenarios where unless, maybe it's a money matcher thing, but you're still attaching more because it's just a totally dead money. If you look at sort of like what the potential free agent class is in 2025 or who could be coming up for extensions for like sign and trades, like that group is much better in 2025. Simmons' money is off the books there. Maybe you make a decision on Claxton where it's like you don't bring him back because you're really keeping the cap clean or something like that. But I do worry here, mostly because I just really can't see it short of like a gross overpay for somebody that maybe isn't a total needle mover.
Yep.
That I think Nets fans, especially with this news now, like I think you need to start preparing that, like, hey, you know what you're watching here tonight? That could be 2024-25 too. Right.
Yep.
And just because I actually don't see a lot of different moves, and maybe they exist, like maybe it's Trae Young, maybe it's, something, maybe it's the Donovan Mitchell, maybe one of these things, it would come at a heavy cost.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd be having a different discussion on a very flawed team that still has 40 million of basically dead money on it. And that it's not getting better. And I just wonder if the math and the calculus here is like one more year of pain. And then it's total, and then we're free and clear. It's like, I just got to let the lease run out on this girl. I don't like living here.
Yeah.
But I really don't want to pay 2 rents. And so if we can just let the lease, we get to the end of the lease and we can go our separate ways. Maybe I just don't see a lot of other outs here.
No, I tend to agree with you, and I think that it's damning, and this is something we've talked about now with the Mikal Bridges, the Cameron Johnson, and the state of what this team looks like. I think maybe this was, to your point about the Nets have for some time been out on Ben Simmons being any part of their, building future over the next couple of seasons and beyond this current contract that needs to expire. But they believed that what they were bringing in was going to be appetizing for the fan base, that was going to be fun, that was going to be a playoff team. Hey, we'll make the play-in tournament. We'll get to that A seed. We get bounced. Maybe we win one game, maybe we win two games, but there's something there. And you're at least selling, we got some vibes, and the regular seasons are going to be fun. This version of this team that we've been watching, as we talk about, this is not, I think, what they thought the Band-Aid would be, right? They tried to put a Band-Aid on a wound that needed surgery. And now they're realizing that. So when you run out the Mikal Bridges version of this team next season, it's going to look, to your point, very similar to what we've been seeing so far. And that's going to get a lot worse. Remember, 23 games into this year, the Nets were 13-10. And then it takes another 10 games to say, oh, things are starting to go the wrong way here a little bit. It could be the entire year. And what's that going to look like? Obviously, for a team doesn't control their own picks, doesn't control their own destiny here. I wonder if that does, as we always will continue to bring up, change the way this organization looked at what the version was going to be for 2 years versus maybe what they should be pivoting to.
By the way, the reason that they did feel that way, or I'm like, it wasn't just, publicly facing, they had a chance last year at the end of the year to sort of like soft tank out of the playoffs when they knew they were going to swap with Houston, and Houston was already like all the way at the bottom of the lottery. Yeah. Right. And it was like, hey, we're almost definitely by the odds never going to swap with them here because Houston, like they have the third pick or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the Nets were almost never going to jump them. But even if you did, it was like, hey, we both have awesome picks. Right. Like, and they chose not to. Right. They chose to make a push, and they get swept out of the playoffs, and it kind of gets them nothing. Right. Except for decent vibes. And they went into this year. Now, the stakes were a little different this year because they knew they didn't have the pick. But I think based on last year, they kind of thought like it was better than it was. Yep. Right. And I think they've massively miscalculated. They massively miscalculated, right? Like what they had. And I get worried because that calculation was so wrong that the future calculations will also be wrong. Right. Like, right. You have to worry about that.
The Jock Vaughn extension, right? Like, so you sell yourself an idea, then you commit to it in various different ways. And then all of a sudden you come to this year, well, you acknowledge one mistake, but what's the correction of that mistake? And if we get to this offseason and they don't keep Kevin Ollie and they hire that new coach, find the sexiest name, that even in and of itself might be the note here, or the indicator that they still think that they can get this thing back on track if they just get the right guy at the helm. So we said this before about Sean Marks and the Nets. Sometimes their acknowledgement of what is happening around them, it's a bit of a slow burn until they come to that ultimate reality. And it's bitten them multiple times over the past few seasons.
What big name is going to come coach here? Like,
by the way, too, we talk about the stars. It's another really good point too. Like, who's coming in the door without
these coaches aren't going to do things that are
contract.
Short of like Monty Williams money, where it's like, oh, you want to come coach the Pistons? Here's the biggest contract we've ever given out to any coach in history. Right. I mean, it's not really going exactly well, but but at least he could be like, hey, it's 10, it's huge 10 years. It's Cade, it's Jalen Duren, it's Jaden Ivey. Like, there's young stars, possibly stars here. And, we're going to draft high in the draft this year, and they get Osser. And like, I mean, the Nets can't tell. What are they going to go to Coach Bud and be like, he's gonna be like, what? And have my future win percentage go way down? No thanks. Like, who's gonna do it? No one's gonna say yes to this.
Coach.
So I think Ollie's gonna be the coach again next year.
We got a real opportunity to draft somebody.
I just don't know why another coach would say yes. It would just tarnish their own win percentage. Like, they would just have to look at it. Quinn Snyder, it's like, oh, I'll go to Atlanta. I'm going to have a ton of team control, and I have Trey there. I'll figure it out.
Right.
Right. It's not exactly going right, but these big names, they take Doc Rivers, but I don't think he's that amazing of a coach, but it's like, hey, I'm going with Giannis and Lillard. I'll come out of the booth for that. Like, what big name coach is coming out of retirement from another team to come to coach this team? It would tarnish their legacy almost for sure.
That being the case, I think good vibes though overall. Like, just to tie a bow on, I feel pretty good about.
Oh, dude, come on
right now. Yeah,
Yeah, come on,
Hold on.
amazing vibes. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Much appreciated. Look, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here. It's just like this is the reality of the situation. We're living in a weird time in Nets world. This is just how we are. You want to go visit other times in Nets world? Go to WeGotNets.com. How about that transition, buddy? We Got Nets. That was not the best of the business for nothing.
Yeah.
WeGotNets.com. You grab that free ebook. You take a look at other stops along the way in Nets history. It's free. Just put in your email. That's all you got to do. Come join us over there. Gonna be having plenty to coming down the pike. WeGotNets.com.
The hottest love has the coldest end. Why that is Socrates.
Oh, Socrates, one of the all-time great poets.
He's so great.
He's so great. Oh man, whenever you do that, dude, it just gets me every time. Just do the podcast for the rest of our lives, just for the quotes at the end. It'd be worth it for me, buddy. All the way to the grave. All right, we'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Oh, sorry, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Brooklyn Nets basketball. Socrates basketball. Yeah.